Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in this seminar where we aim to disseminate the final conclusions of the FACTI Panel report to the Brazilian audience. We have a very good lineup of speakers today to discuss several of the topics touched upon in the report. To start our conversation today, we have Ana Cláudia Utumi, who is the director of ABDF in Brazil. It's the IFA branch of in Brazil, and the co-chair of IFA Win Brazil and a partner at Utumi Law Firm, and will be giving you the introductory remarks and welcome today. So Ana Cláudia, up with you.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you everyone for being here with us. It's a pleasure. Also on behalf of ABDF, that is the sole representative in Brazil of the International Fiscal Association, I would like to thank, first of all, our co-chairs, Ana Carolina Monguilô and Flávia Cavalcante, co-chairs of Women of IFA Network Brazil, of Win Brazil, for their efforts and hard work to organize this important event together with our director, Daniele Brigagão. And of course, a special thanks to the United Nations and our dear and tireless colleague, Tatiana Falcão, who took the initiative for organizing this event, liaising with FACTI panel members and coordinating our efforts towards this objective. And also, I thank the participation of our panelists today, all of them renowned, very well recognized in the market, and we are very, very happy and proud to have each of you here. And just a brief words on the Women of IFA Network, that is an initiative started in 2013 at IFA Congress in Copenhagen. And we at the ABDF, we've been supporting these initiatives since the beginning. I'm proud to have been one of the pioneers of this initiative after our Global Win founders, that is Jean Goulet, that is the Global Win chair, and Carol Tello, that unfortunately passed last year. And we see many advances being achieved with the events of and projects headed by Win Brazil, and demonstrating how important it is to foster women network and to foster more work like this one together with the United Nations, with FACTI Panel. We are very happy to see all advances of WIN. In relation to the topic of this panel, very briefly, the subjects held in this report, in this financial integrity for sustainable development of FACTI, that is the Financial Accountability, Transparency, and Integrity Initiative of the UN. And the points identified are very, very relevant in Brazil. So all these points of tax evasion, corruption, money laundering, flow of illicit funds, the necessity of full transparency are subjects that are very, very important here in Brazil. We have along the years strengthened the legal and institutional mechanisms to combat these illicit activities. In the last 20 years, we had a lot of advances, but there is no question that we need more. We need more. And one of the topics that we will address today is in relation to how much Brazil loses in tax revenues because of tax evasion, because of all sorts of frauds and crimes, it is estimated in up to $230 billion annually. And this is a joint report of the International ISP, International Public Services, and Global Alliance for Tax Justice, that we will listen in a more detailed manner. So we note how important it is, especially in a scenario that we are losing a lot of revenue because of the COVID crisis, increasing the expenses also because of the COVID crisis, and the developments proposed by FACTI Panel of this report are very welcome in Brazil, and we hope that this short event can be a seed for even more developments in the field of the subjects dealt in the report. And on behalf of ABDF for Brazil, I wish we all have an excellent panel discussion and event. Thanks, Tatiana. I get back to you.
Excuse me, I was muted. Thank you very much for your kind words, Ana Claudia. We go ahead now with the introductory remarks from Ms. Manorma Soeknandan, who is a FACTI panelist representing Suriname, and she will be presenting some of the conclusions of the final reports. On to you, Ms. Soeknandan.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. And let me start. I also want to thank the organization and Tatiana for the invitation, of course. And I really hope that we will have a productive session today. Well, the panel was established in February 2020, and it was done through the president of ECOSOC and the General Assembly. So that tells you how important the work of this panel was and still is. We have presented the report in February, and what we are doing currently is creating awareness, making people know, share information about the content of the report. Not only that, but what needs to be done in the United Nations member states to implement the recommendations coming from this panel. Because you will all agree with me that panel cannot implement. It is member states who have to implement. So with your permission, I would like then to start my presentation. Let me see if it can be done quickly. I hope you can see the presentation.
No.
No.
Try to press share screen. It should be at the bottom of your screen. Oh, blue, green button, yes.
Okay, there we go. Okay, do you have it now?
No.
Not yet.
Oh my God. Okay, I don't want to lose time because I just had it up. I don't know why it is not.
If you try to press.
Yes?
Do you see the button on the bottom, a green one? share screen. At the rare button, there is participants chat and then a share screen button.
Share. Do you see it now?
Yes, now we do. Yes, excellent.
Oh my. Okay, thank you very much. My apologies. I'm not an IT expert, to be honest. Okay, so the title of the panel, it's mentioned. I already told you the background, why the UN FACTI Panel. We all know that we have to achieve the 2030 development goals, the sustainable development goals, and a lot of money is needed. So the mandate was, where do you look for money? How do you get the money to finance the achievement of the sustainable development goals? And that is the main reason why this panel was established by the presidents of ECOSOC and the UN General Assembly. So we had internally what we did,
Ms. Soeknandan, if you press F5, it will start the slide presentation. It'll be easier.
Right, I've done that, but it's not happening. Okay, so internally, we divided the panel into 3 clusters, okay? One cluster dealt with tax cooperation, another cluster dealt with accountability, public reporting, and anti-corruption, and the other cluster dealt with international cooperation and dispute settlement, okay? So this is how we work. But of course, we had many sessions, internal sessions, and we participated in each other's groups and so on. We also had discussions, consultations with a wide variety of stakeholders, including politicians, regional organizations, UN organizations, ambassadors to the United Nations, the Caribbean, Latin America. I can vividly remember the participants from Brazil, from Argentina, from Mexico, and so on. With international civil society organizations, the OECD, the FATF, organizations or institutions within regional organizations. We also met with former President Mbeki, I think even twice. And so, I mean, it's really a wide range of consultations took place, also with the UN member states, ambassadors to the UN, and so forth. So that it's quite a number of the EU people, also OECD, as I mentioned. And we had also what we did, we presented the interim report to them, and we asked for comments, questions, clarifications. We also received reports from experts in the several areas. And based on the several discussions and what was submitted to us and so on, we came up with 14 recommendations. The recommendations are in the report, but I find it necessary to still quickly go through it. And I know I only have 10 minutes, but one is accountability. And for that to achieve the accountability, all countries should enact legislation providing for the widest possible range of tools to pursue cross-border financial crimes. Okay. We're also looked at legitimacy, international tax norms, particularly tax transparency standards should be established. You will notice when I go through the recommendations that the panel is strongly proposing that we work, or whatever is being done is within the UN context, meaning the global context, and not going into several entities dealing with these issues. Why? Because we want a more or less uniform system whereby all participants, developing and developed countries, are involved so that you have the buy-in, which is very important. And not that just a group of countries come together and they come up with standards, norms, and so on, and everybody else has to adhere to those. So that's the reason why we have chosen for the UN context. Now, we're looking at transparency. That is another recommendation when we go to transparency. And that is international, any anti-money laundering standards should require that all countries create a centralized registry for holding beneficial ownership information on all legal vehicles. The standard should encourage countries to make the information public. Often, these days, you do not know who are behind establishing all these kinds of companies, and these companies are then registered in respective jurisdictions. And we all know that the issue of the so-called shell companies, okay? So another one in the area of when we're looking at transparency is to improve tax transparency by having all private multinational entities publish accounting and financial information on a country-by-country basis. Also building on existing voluntary efforts, all countries should strengthen public procurement and contracting transparency, including transparency of emergency measures taken to respond to COVID-19. An example is for the stimulus packages that are being given, the procurement of goods, procurement of services, and so on. You know, we always say when there is a crisis, that's the best period or time when people want to benefit as much as possible. So what do we have in place to prevent the misuse of these funds or the misuse of providing funding for people? Okay, so that is when we're talking about transparency. And of course, we also took into account our current experience with COVID, not only now, but when there is an earthquake or when there is a hurricane, there is enough of experience of how things should not be done. Fairness, that's another, or under the title of fairness, there is another recommendation that taxpayers, especially multinational corporations, should pay their fair share of taxes. The UN Tax Convention should provide for effective capital gains taxation, and taxation must be equitably applied on services delivered digitally, meaning the digital economy. Currently, it's something that is really developed, and this requires taxing multinational corporations based on group global profit. Also create fairer rules and stronger incentives to combat tax competition, tax avoidance, and tax evasion, starting with an agreement on a global minimum corporate tax. Currently, a lot is going on in relation to the global minimum corporate tax. Several countries are now discussing this, and hopefully we will have the implementation when it comes to a minimum corporate tax. Also create an impartial and fair mechanism to resolve international tax disputes under the UN Tax Convention. Recommendation 5, well, it continues with fairness, and that is to create a multilateral mediation mechanism to fairly assist countries in resolving these difficulties on international asset recovery and return, and to strengthen compensation. Also, escrow accounts managed by regional development banks should be used to manage frozen or seized assets until they can be legally returned. A question was asked recently about what about the cryptocurrency assets. When we were having the discussions, we did not go into detail. There were 2 countries when we had our sessions with member states who said that currently they are developing legislation in this area. But globally, when you look what is going on, several UN member states have prohibited, okay, these types of transfer or even that their citizens get involved in this, what we call the cryptocurrency dealings. So that is the reason why you will not see this in our panel document, because currently this is being developed in several member states. It is not yet so far that we can now incorporate this in our recommendation or in our report. Okay, so we go to 8. When we look at enablers, that is another recommendation 6. And here we are really focusing on governments, what governments should do, and policy-wise especially. And then also we are going to the non-state actors, and that is the international community. And we are looking here at this, and this is not taken lightly, especially by those stakeholders who, I would not say the panel is targeting these stakeholders or these groups, but these are also service providers who benefit from conducting certain activities, and by enabling, I would say, companies and those in the economic and financial sector to conduct those types of activities that we would not promote, and that where we're saying that no, this is not the way to go for. So that's why we're talking about here that we have to protect human rights defenders, anti-corruption advocates, investigative journalists, and so on. But we also know that we have service providers who you would not say you want to protect them because they are involved in finding mechanisms and finding ways in assisting carrying out activities that we would not like to have. Okay, so recommendation 7 is very important. We all know about the several reports that came out. Had it not been for the journalists or what we call the whistleblowers, we would not have known about these types of activities going on. International cooperation, it's crucial because we need to end information sharing asymmetries in relation to information shared for tax purposes, so that all countries developing and developed can receive information timely, enable free exchange of information at national level, and also promote exchange of information internationally among law enforcement, customs, and other authorities. We are also looking at some dynamism, that's a value if you want to say it. International organization must provide timely advice related to IFFs so that procedures, norms, and policies can be updated regularly, which means you need to have built-in flexibility. Things cannot be cast in stone, because once you have that, it takes tremendous amount of time and energy and human and financial resources to, again, change rules and regulations. Governments must dynamically adjust their national and international systems in response to new risks. Then capacity building is another very crucial one, especially for developing countries. And in recommendation 10, then, we're focusing on capacity building in several areas, okay? Corruption, money laundering, tax abuse, and so forth. Also, we are proposing to strengthen the capacity of the UNODC and also to conduct research in certain areas, which is mentioned here. Data is, again, crucial because policy is based on data. You need to have concrete evidence. And data sharing in several areas when it comes to whether it's taxation or money laundering or beneficial ownership, you need data. And it is not only about collecting data, it's also about sharing data, and it is also about, when you're talking about asset recovery and so on, data is very important. And we all know that you know, our organizations are not so eager in sharing information. That is another issue. So a lot of work needs to be done in this area. The implementation review, that is another recommendation, is the two segments here are update the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, implementation review mechanism to improve comprehensiveness, inclusiveness, important, all need to be included, impartiality, transparency, and especially monitoring, and update the UN CAC and other peer review mechanisms to reduce duplication and increase efficiency. This was a big issue when we met with several stakeholders like the OECD and several member states, the EU. The panel is absolutely not proposing that we duplicate and triplicate or that we come up with new mechanisms, because that will cost money. You need a lot of funding for that. And again, it will also need human resources. What you have currently and is working well needs to be strengthened, needs to be improved. That is what the panel is proposing, and not that we create new mechanisms and that we create new institutions, etc. It's already difficult to sustain and maintain what we have currently so that it can work and properly and serve the needs of our peoples and of citizens. National governance is another one. Government should create robust and coordinated national governance mechanisms that efficiently reinforce financial integrity for sustainable development and publish national reviews evaluating their own performance. So this is internal. Now we can go to recommendation 14, global governance. Establish an inclusive and legitimate global coordination mechanism at the United Nations Economic and Social Council to address financial integrity on a systemic level, building up on existing structures. I mentioned this already. Starting with the existing FATF plenary, creating the legal foundation for an inclusive intergovernmental body on tax matters under the United Nations. Again, it's inclusive, meaning we need developed and developing countries on board for the buy-in, for the implementation, and for their active input. And starting with the, well, I mentioned that, and design a mechanism to integrate the UNCAC, design a mechanism to integrate this into the coordination body under the auspice of the ECOSOC. Those are the 14 recommendations coming from the panel, and I'm sharing this with you. Let us hear from the respective specialists on several issues that are also going on in Brazil, and I hope we will have a productive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Soeknandan, for this overview of the 14 recommendations of the report. It indeed reflects the incredible work that the panel has undertaken for the past year, and it provides for the framework for our discussions that are upcoming next, as we will touch on select topics included within the framework of those recommendations. So today's event is actually scheduled in kind of 3 Q&As. The first Q&A will touch on the topic of financial integrity for sustainable development. And we'll discuss how the FACTI panel's recommendations can be applied or have been applied within a Brazilian context. So speaking today, we have Ms. Graziele Custódio Davi, who is a policy advisor at Global Alliance for Tax Justice. Besides her role at Global Alliance for Tax Justice, she's an advisor on fiscal justice and human rights, producer of the podcast É da Sua Conta by Tax Justice Network, and a PhD candidate on economic development at the University of Campinas. Debating her presentation, we have Ana Cláudia Lutumi, whom you've met, and is the director of ABDF, co-chair of the IFA Women in Tax Brazil, and a partner at Utumi Advogados, a law firm in Brazil. And then, of course, we have Ms. Manorma Soeknandan, who will be mediating the session, and to provide her full bio, which I didn't disclose last time. Mrs. Soeknandan is the FACTI Panel member representing Suriname and Deputy Secretary General of Caricom Secretariat. She is the first female resident ambassador of the Republic of Suriname to Guyana. And before that appointment, she also served as ambassador to CARICOM, Cuba, and Jamaica. So we have an excellent panel ahead, and I'll pass the floor on to Ms. Davi.
Well, thank you all for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about the FACTI Panel recommendations, which come in such a valuable time for us to think on the recovery after the COVID-19 effects on economics and on social effects. And it's congratulating the organizer for having a panel with so many women. This is amazing on the subject to talk about. So moving on the aspects from Brazil, I guess that I would start saying Brazil loses at least $15 billion a year to international tax abuse. That comes from super rich and large corporations. And when we are about large corporations, that's why I said at least this data is considering only the OECD country by country reporting data that were delivered by the biggest multinationals. This is a data that came from the State of the International Tax Justice report from Tax Justice Network, Global Alliance for Tax Justice, and International Public Services. And also what we've seen with this information is that Brazil is also the third country that loses the most tax revenue due to tax abuse. And in the ranking of the Corporate Tax Haven Index, also made by Tax Justice Network, Brazil is on the 64th position. What does that mean? That means that Brazil is one of the countries that suffers the most from tax abuse, but it's not one of the countries that makes it easier for large corporations to promote tax abuses. So it's losing on both sides. It's losing tax revenue and it's not causing the tax abuse. Being the problem to a sustainable development in the financial, fiscal, environmental aspects, and also in the guarantee of human rights, the countries that mostly facilitate tax abuse and least contribute to financial integrity are the OECD countries, precisely the same ones that today formulate the regulations. I must also say that in this Corporate Tax Haven Index, England and its dependent countries are the countries that mostly promote tax abuses. So this is why the OECD is no longer and should have never been the space to discuss international tax reform. We need a tax body within the United Nations for this. As organizations in the international tax justice movement, we have been asking this for years. Precisely, this is the biggest and longest campaign the Global Alliance for Tax Justice has engaged and keeps pushing almost every day. I would say all our campaigns, we have this line. We need a UN tax body to discuss a tax reform, to discuss financial integrity. So we are really glad to see that this is one of the main recommendations that comes from the FACTI panel. Ensuring that all countries have the right to speak and vote on international financial rules is the way to guarantee the principles and recommendations that the FACTI panel brings as essential for financial integrity to sustainable development. And how does Brazil enter on this? So Brazil is not yet a member of the OECD. So even though Brazil might be able to make some comments and get to know some information, especially on the BEPS mechanism and pillars like Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, it's not able to vote on them. So Brazil is losing a lot of tax revenue and is not able to vote on the subjects that mostly affect this country, as happens to many other countries in the Global South. I'm going to speak mostly on 4 recommendations that comes from the FACTI panel and has to do with it. The first one is the one on legitimacy, which is what we are talking so far. International tax rules must be discussed in spaces with universal participation of countries, which is we need a United Nations Tax Convention. Brazil has been struggling to join the OECD, but it should actually put its energy into making this convention a reality. Those who represent Brazil at the UN should make the most to have this United Nations Tax Convention. That's what will help Brazil to deal better with the effects that it suffers from losing so much money that could be used nationally to guarantee human rights and a sustainable development, but it's being lost. Also, talking about transparency and social participation, the agenda on that the FACTI panel is pushing now as a recommendation, the 2 main ones on transparency is something that Tax Justice Network has been pushing hard. So we are very happy with this because we really see this as a possibility to actually make taxing big corporations a reality, which are public registration of final beneficiaries in each country and a country-by-country financial report of multinational corporations. And it's highly important that these documents shouldn't be kept secret as it is happening now within the OECD. Big corporations are delivering their country-by-country report to the OECD, but we are not able to actually know which multinational is actually giving this information. We shouldn't know just by country. We should be able to know the information by multinational. We should be able, as civil society, to have the information of which are the biggest multinationals causing us more harm and how should they actually be punished too. So on this, these are essential measures that we also agree. And we really need that transparency also happens in the national level. So we need that the economic policies to also have transparency. For years, Brazil has advanced on transparency in many public policies. For example, the public budget is so much open now, and we are able to make important analysis. But when it comes, for example, to the National Treasury, to the Central Bank, their policies are not very open to society, and it could be. And especially not just transparency, but something that I'm going to say, transparency is highly important, but it's not sufficient. For transparency to have its effect, social participation is mandatory for real transformation. That's why, especially these spaces of economic policies in Brazil should promote more social participation, what is not happening. And worse, many other public policies, we must remember that economic policies are public policies. They used to have a lot of social participations, and in the last years, we are actually losing. So transparency is reducing and social participation is reducing in Brazil, going on the opposite side of what are the recommendations from the FACTI panel. Another recommendation that is highly important and that we always talk about, we are a movement on tax justice, is justice. So everyone must pay their fair share of taxes, including multinational corporations. We can't stand anymore that those who are making more profits around the world, including during this pandemic crisis, are the ones who are not paying taxes, are not contributing to the countries where they make their profits. And we need them to pay, and for them to pay in a progressive way. So the UN International Conventions should guide how to tax these capital gains effectively and equitably, which requires taxing the global profits of multinationals. And for this discussion is advancing strongly now in the OECD and the United Nations, especially with Biden proposal, and has just now started to arrive in Brazil with some articles. Also on this subject of the global minimum corporate tax, it's not enough to think of a tax on financial transactions or financial services by taxes on consumption, as has been said here in Brazil and done in some other countries in Latin America, for example. It has got to be a tax on the global profit of this corporation. When we talk about digital taxations of this big tax, for example, it has got to be on profit and not just on consumption. Also, it's necessary to create a mechanism to resolve this international tax dispute, to end this run to the bottom of how to tax multinationals. These are the main points that we've been thinking about the recommendations for Brazil, and we are happy to keep engaging with you on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. David. I am not going to repeat, I was taking notes. You mentioned the tax abuse conducted by the mega nationals. You gave a clear example of how Brazil is losing, and it's at two ends. You also mentioned the financial abuse. You mentioned the issue with the OECD. Well, we had our discussions with the OECD, so I fully understand what you're talking about. It should be a UN tax body. Indeed, that's what the panel is also proposing, because something that came up again and again and again in our panel is that, yes, member states of the UN can be involved in certain groupings like the OECD, but they don't have a voting right. So that is something else. All inclusiveness means you're actively participating, but you should also have a voting right. And that is what is missing. So that is the reason why also the panel strongly proposed that we have a UN tax body and a UN dispute settlement. And when it comes to sanctions and so on, it should be for all countries, all member states of the UN, not only for a certain group and not for another group. Another issue was, of course, when all these bodies and institutions were set up in our part of the world, the developing countries. I mean, come on, most of the countries were still a colony, right? So they were not part of these negotiations and so on. So it's now that you're stepping into it. So, and that's why the issue of capacity building is also very important, and training and so on. So another very important point you mentioned when it comes to transparency at the national level, it's not only about the public budget, it's also about the central bank, it's also about the treasury, and something that I picked up from you is the social transparency. Yes, we talk a lot about transparency, the social transparency, meaning for the public, right? The input of the civil society. How do you, whatever policy you have, how do you vote? How does the civil society, how does the citizen vote its people, its politicians and policymakers accountable for the activities they are conducting? So the social transparency is very important. So the progressive way of paying taxes is something else that you mentioned, and justice should be for all and not only for a small group. So I want to leave it here, but I missed something, and something very important. What is in this report directly also relates to empowerment of women. Because if we can prevent all these illicit flows, if we can prevent, minimize corruption and so on, a lot more monies can be directed towards developing our stakeholders in our member states, towards empowering our women, right? So all those monies are currently being lost. And that is something that we also have to tackle. So that the women group in Brazil is hosting this. I mean, I really appreciate this, and it's really commendable. I hope other countries also take this example. So having said that, I now would like to ask for the intervention by Ms. Ana Claudia Utumi, please.
Thank you, and very interesting insights and comments. And in fact, when reading all the FACTI recommendations, it's difficult to say which one is the most important, because they are all very important. And as the subject of this part is financial integrity, I wanted to call the attention that in the last 20 years, not only in different parts of the world, but also in Brazil, we've had significant advances in terms of control of financial of the activities in the financial and capital markets, but for sure there's much more to be done in terms of combating the harms that hurt our society and reduce the capabilities of our governments. I wanted also to call the attention that we are facing here in Brazil the 7th year in a row of fiscal deficit. And this fiscal deficit for the time being is being funded by new debts. And many experts, they alert that we are close to our limit. For example, the IMF projects that by the end of this year, our debt will be approximately 98% of our GDP. So it's more than necessary for Brazil to look closely at these recommendations and see what else it is possible to do to assure the maximum tax revenues, because if I don't have tax revenues and continue with this deficit, there will be a point that we won't have capacity as a country to raise more funds, which may put us back to the inflation, significant inflation times and so on. And another point that was not raised, and it would be interesting to raise here in terms of financial integrity, is the rise of cryptocurrencies. We see that cryptocurrencies is no longer restricted to small groups of more daring tech guys, but it's spreading out in most different countries and sectors. So one of the challenges, so if you go to the website of one of the cryptocurrencies exchange in Brazil, they say that they have more than 1 million users of the platform here in Brazil. So only one exchange. So be able to control the flows through the cryptocurrency markets is crucial to avoid money launderers to move there and make sure that the corresponding funds are also subject to the proper taxation. And I see here in the report this concern on the abusive and aggressive tax planning, because of course that this kind of scheme ends up involving a lot of money, a significant amount of money. But sometimes I even question myself whether this environment of so much tax evasion, not only tax planning, but significant tax planning, tax evasion that we have in Brazil, that is far more, that is definitely more serious than, it's not, there is no discussion on the legality of this tax evasion. Whether the fact of tax evasion being socially accepted in Brazil increase also the greed of our entrepreneurs, of our executives to save taxes at all costs. I say that because it's very common for a CEO of a company to go to a country club with a friends, and the friends, they praise themselves of being great entrepreneurs, that they don't pay taxes or they pay very little tax. And this CEO goes back to his company on Monday and say, look, my friends, they have similar company as mine and they are paying much less taxes. What you guys in the financial area, in the tax area, in the legal area are doing that we are paying so much taxes? Because one point that we have here is that when I say, and it's a very strong statement, that tax evasion is socially accepted here in Brazil, is that we all know people that sell the real estate property for the double and declare the half. We have many friends, even relatives that are buying merchandise from smugglers and not from official stores, and we don't do nothing on that. And we see many countries increasing the public awareness on the importance to pay taxes in such a way that the public can also charge the companies, can also be on the top of the companies to look at what they are doing in their tax work. So I wanted to listen a bit of Graziele on this point on whether if we have an increase of the public awareness on the problems caused by the lack of tax revenues would be in the medium long term profitable for Brazil to increase tax revenues. And the second point that I wanted also to listen Graziele about relates to include abusive tax planning in the same baskets of other crimes, other financial crimes, and so on. In a country in which we have so many disputes of tax authorities and taxpayers. I'm not saying that the taxpayers are always right, not at all, but for sure the tax authorities are not always right as well. We see transactions in which you have inspection from authorization from central bank, inspection from professional minority shareholders, from the Brazilian SEC, sometimes from the US SEC, and these transactions are qualified as abusive for tax purpose in a tax dispute, generating huge amounts of disputes. And what I'm saying on treating tax planning in different basket, abusive and aggressive tax planning in a different basket, is that because we don't have a general anti-avoidance rule, we end up using a very broad concept of the civil code of abuse that is abusive, even to act against what is the good manners of a certain region. And we have so many different regions with different manners, so it's very broad, the definition of abuse that we've been using in tax. And this is causing many multinational groups to go out from Brazil because they normally have the largest tax disputes in the world here in Brazil. So, of course, I need to combat tax planning, abusive tax planning, aggressive tax planning, but we cannot look at any tax saving and say that it's abusive, because this is causing a significant problem for the multinational groups. We are losing multinational groups in bunch. It's not a matter, of course, when we have a very big multinational group leaving, as the case of Ford, we have in the front pages of newspapers, but there are many foreign groups of different sizes that they leave Brazil because they don't support so many tax disputes. That's why in the Brazilian environment, including abusive tax planning, aggressive tax planning in the same basket of money laundering, of other financial crimes, I believe it can be a little bit, let's say, excessive without, of course, acknowledging the need of combating the abusive situations. And we see that these abusive situations, the actual abusive situation, is very much linked to what I said of entrepreneurs and executives wanting to save taxes and thinking that the paper may accept anything. So it's, if I do a beautiful contract, I can save taxes. And this is not like this anymore. So I wanted to hear Graziele on these two topics that I believe that are very important: the public awareness of the socially accepted, the tax evasion being socially accepted, people saying that, well, it's better the money in my pocket than in the money of the pocket of these corrupted guys, and being able to distinguish what is real abusive tax and aggressive tax planning that we need to combat without struggling so much multinational, local and multinational groups with so many tax assessments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Utumi. Two issues, and I would like to ask Ms. David, if you could please comment now and give your perspective on what was said by Ms. Utumi.
Oh, thank you. Those are two very important subjects on this matter for Brazil. On the first one, it has a lot to do with the idea of tax culture. So for some countries, let's say Denmark, people actually understand the purpose of having taxes, and I would actually say they are kind of happy to pay taxes. But when we come to Brazil, what we see is quite the opposite. And there are many reasons for this to happen. It's an entire culture that goes behind. So we have to go over each one of them to actually change this idea and this perspective. It's not going to be something that will happen from the night to the day. First, I would say that, yes, one of the things that we need to work on is actually to show the numbers of what we are losing. So what is the tax revenue that we are losing to tax abuse, and what are the effects of this? So if we're losing tax revenue, we are losing the capacity to have a good fiscal balance, for example. We are losing the capacity for the state to financial public services, and we are losing the capacity to promote women's rights, for example. But as you said, some people would say, oh, but I don't see that the tax revenue would go for that. This is going actually for corruption. So this brings us to another topic, which is how we are dealing the corruption subject, not only in Brazil, but in many other places. So when we actually look to what happens in illicit financial flows, what we see is that only 20% of that goes actually to corruption, and 80% goes to the tax abuse of multinationals on international business. And we've been building this narrative on corruption, which is really important. We really need to combat corruption, but we can't just focus on that. But we've been doing that in Brazil. We've talked a lot about corruption. People have understood and have engaged on this subject, but we have not talked about tax abuse from multi-corporations in Brazil. And actually, they are the ones promoting mostly the illicit financial flow. So we need to start talking about this in another perspective and bringing the idea of the effects of losing tax revenue. And showing that paying taxes is not, it's not like a half burden that we have. It's actually contribute for the country, to promote rights, to make sure that we have public services. But that will only come if we also have a tax system that is fair. And our tax system is not fair. More than 50% of our taxes come from consumption. That actually makes people feel, and they are right on feeling that they are the ones paying many taxes and others are not, because this is true. The poorest ones are proportionally paying more taxes in Brazil than the rich ones, and the multinationals are mostly paying nothing. So it is unfair, and people are right about saying that they are not happy with our tax system. So to change the perspective that people have on taxes, we have to better expand the money, but also to have a better tax system that is more progressive. We are talking about a tax reform in Brazil. The FACTI Panel recommendations should be considered at this tax reform. And we should also consider on the tax reform that we don't plan only to reform the tax on consumption, but that we also change the distribution of taxes from consumption to income, to wealth, and to patrimony. That's the basis that we need. So it's a lot of things that have to happen to change this culture in Brazil, that taxes are bad and we shouldn't pay, and that it's good that you don't pay. So we need to work on many areas. And talking about this tax reform on consumption, this is actually and probably one of the places that we have more dispute, and many corporations and national and international ones saying, oh, taxes in Brazil are very confusing. They are, especially the ones on consumption. There are too many taxes on consumption, too many norms, too many regulations. They are mixed. And yet, using all of that, they are using it to cause tax abuse. So we need to make a tax reform on consumption to make it more efficient and equitable, and to reduce these demands and make it a better space for business. but they also have to stop planning taxes in such an aggressive way. That's why we as civil society are not talking about elision and evasion. We are talking about abuse, because if you are aggressive on your tax planning, you are causing abuse and you are exploring spaces, loopholes in the law that you shouldn't be exploring. That's how we see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear. People want to see evidence that taxes are being used for their benefit. If you want to make them aware and sensitize them, and that we need to have a fair tax system. So a lot of work needs to be done. And I want to thank Ms. David for that answer. A question is also what the panel is doing, follow-up activities. What we're doing currently is making people aware of what is in the report and what needs to be implemented. And that is where it stops, because as I mentioned before, we panel members, we cannot go in member states and we cannot implement. We are not policymakers. That job needs to be done by the respective member states and by the respective stakeholders in the member states, which includes then, of course, the executive in member states. So, and that's why we are having these sessions now after the presentation of the report. So thank you very much. We will now go to our second speaker, which is Ms. Nina Penchak. So you have the floor, please. The theme is illicit financial flows, corruption, evasion, avoidance, and the judiciary, existing trends. And I would like to give you the floor, please.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Manorma Soeknandan. Good morning to you all. First of all, I would like to thank Ms. Tatiana Falcão and Ms. Flavia Cavalcante for the invitation to join this event today. I also would like to thank Associação Brasileira de Direito Financeiro for co-hosting and supporting the FACTI Panel. That's the really important and needed initiative of the UN on financial integrity. I confess that it feels good to see that UN is aware of the interaction between tax and social justice and is building up actions like this one. It's also an honor to share the virtual room with incredible and skilled women, and it's important to congratulate the organization, especially Women in IFA Network, for the choice of the panelists. It's notorious that one of the biggest concerns of FACTI Panel report is tax frauds enlarging poverty and gender inequality. So it's essential that the discussions also reflect these concerns, and the first step is to provide space for women in tax debates. So before starting my presentation, I have two disclaimers. As you know, my mission today is sharing the direction judiciary is taking regarding to illicit financial flows, evasion, and corruption. So I'm going to talk about some decisions and trends of the Supreme Court that I recognize as an observer in the position of a law clerk and a scholar. However, it does not necessarily reflect my personal views. I believe that more important than we discuss the correction of the decisions is to think about their impacts in relation to the FACTI Panel goals. Having said this, I will approach the role of the Brazilian Federal Supreme Court as part of the law enforcement of FACTI recommendations, dividing my presentation in three parts. The first one is transparency, the second one is fight against corruption and evasion, and the third one is fiscal justice. In the end, I'll try to predict the next steps of the court towards these objectives. So I begin the presentation talking about transparency. As Brazilian lawyers are aware, privacy and individuals' data secrets are fundamental rights protected by the Brazilian Constitution. Nevertheless, they are not absolute rights, which means that they can be mitigated if there is another fundamental right that should prevail in case of conflict. And one of the most sensitive data is information related to individuals' bank account transactions. In the past, the government could only access bank information with a judicial permission. This was the general rule until 2001, when the legislator passed an act that imposed all financial institutions an obligation to share with Federal Revenue Office information on transactions in order to avoid tax fraud. The act also gave permission to the federal, states, and municipalities' revenue offices to investigate transactions with access to banking documents and information in case there were suspicions of illicit activity or tax fraud. This 2001 Act was challenged by taxpayers before the Supreme Court. They claimed that the law disrespected the fundamental rights of privacy and bank secrecy. But the court stated, with dissenting opinions, that there is a duty of information implicit in the Constitution that compels taxpayers to provide administrative authorities all the tax information they need to ensure that taxes are being regularly paid. In the majority opinion of the court, led by Justice Edson Fachin, it was also declared that Brazil is part of OECD's BEPS project and signed international multilateral conventions obliging the country to impose measures to secure transparency in both national and international levels. However, it's important to say that the free access of tax authorities to bank information does not mean that this information becomes public. The opposite happens, since it becomes responsibility of these authorities to secure the secrecy of information and its use only for the legal purpose. The violation of this duty by tax authorities is considered a crime. And in 2019, the Supreme Court took a new step towards transparency, allowing that COAF, or nowadays UIF, that's the Brazilian Financial Intelligence Unit, and the Federal Revenue Office to provide Federal Prosecutor's Office their reports, financial and tax, their reports with financial and tax data with no need of a judicial order when the transactions are considered suspected or illicit. And commenting this decision, I started the next stop, which is the fight against corruption and tax evasion. This 2019 Supreme Court decision, as Justice Alexandre de Moraes declared in the leading opinion, is seen as an advance not only in national and international transparency and information sharing, but also in the fight against corruption, money laundering, terrorism financing, and international drug trade. It's in the same context of the international agreements that Brazil signed, such as the recommendation of Financial Action Task Force, FATF. Most of the justices agreed that financial and tax information can be shared with public agents responsible for crime investigations and criminal prosecution. And this is an important tool to the fight against corruption and evasion. And in his opinion, Justice Alexandre de Moraes summarized the role of the Supreme Court in fighting corruption, and I quote, the Brazilian Supreme Court has in its records the fact of being an essential institution for the recent legal advance in Brazil in the fight against corruption and money laundering, because it's frequently provoked to decide about legal innovations that aimed to improve the methods of investigation, such as the creation of judicial federal divisions specialized in financial crimes, the allocation of investigative powers in the prosecutor's office, and the institution of the plea bargain, end of quote. And it's impossible to talk about fight against corruption and tax evasion without mentioning the two most famous operations in Brazil regarding those areas. That's Mensalão, criminal action number 470 from 2007, and Lava Jato, car wash operation from 2014. Besides being the most solid investigative and prosecuting operations, they became famous for targeting big companies and white-collar criminals, ones that until then were almost always able to get away without being convicted for their crimes. The scandals involving the misusing of public resources and public functions, corruptions, bribery, and evasions were endless. However, due to the limited amount of time, I only wish to point out that it was during the Mensalão trials that the Supreme Court decided that the crime of illicit transfer of funds was materialized with the transferring of capitals overseas without using the official bank system and with no information about the beneficiary or the purpose of the transference. The proof of the illicit origin of the money was not necessary for the characterization of the crime. On the other hand, car wash and Mensalão are not only about the crimes, they are also related to fiscal justice, as I will bring next. In 1998, the Supreme Court decided that money originated in illicit activities must be taxed due to the principle of pecunia non olet. Car wash operation was also famous because of the efforts of Brazilian Revenue Office together with Federal Prosecutor's Office, in auditing money derived from money laundering, corruption, and bribery. The audits also involved identifying the beneficiaries that became taxpayers and then were charged to pay the taxes and the qualified penalties. To be able to get all the information needed, Federal Revenue tracks the money flows with the assistance of national and international financial institutions, processes data, and receives aid from public agents and from other governments that have signed bilateral treaties with Brazil to share information to tackle corruption and money laundering. And with the pandemic and the increasing demand for public resources, the court allows that capital paid in agreements between the Federal Prosecutor's Office and companies involved in corruption could be used to buy hospital equipment to COVID-19 patients. At first, the money was supposed to be reverted to investments in education and environment preservation. But in March 2020, Justice Alexandre de Moraes authorized that some states use their quota to deal with the public health crisis. In conclusion, as we can see, Brazilian Supreme Court has been putting efforts to confirm the validity of legal measures that increase transparency and information sharing, fight against corruption and tax evasion, and aim financial accountability and fiscal justice. More than once, the court has expressed its concerns with Brazil's position and image in international level and the need to fight against the misuse of public resources to expand the trust in the government institutions. Notwithstanding, nowadays, the court seems to be divided about what's the best way to play its role. Some justices are more conservative than others when it comes to strengthen criminal and tax laws. One trend that I have been noticing is the criminalization of non-payment of taxes as a form of coercing taxpayers to pay in order to avoid criminal charges. It is expected by the court that this measure would help to reduce the cases of criminal tax avoidances. In this context, there is also a strong criticism from some justices about the precedents that established that the payment of taxes extinguishes the possibility of criminal punishment. Also, tax lawyers' attentions are focused on the analysis of the anti-abuse law, which allows the tax administrative authorities to disregard the acts of the taxpayers that disguise their real operations in order to pay less taxes or not paying taxes at all. If the law is deemed constitutional, another act is needed in order to the administrative authorities to be able to audit and charge taxes and penalties considering the real business purposes of the taxpayers' operations and not what they declare they have done. This trial has already started, but it was suspended because one of the justices needed more time to analyze the case. There is no information of when it will be resumed. Well, at last, I need to mention that the Supreme Court has linked its most relevant cases to the goals of 2030 UN agenda, so everyone is able to see the connection between the trials and the agenda's sustainable development goals. The intention of the court is to prioritize the trials related to the goals. These were the topics that I wished to bring to the debate because it is possible to see the ongoing position of the Supreme Court towards some of the recommendations of FACTI. And I'm now interested to hear the opinion of Glaucia and to answer the questions. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nina Penchak. And Ms. Nina Penchak is a legal clerk at the Supreme Federal Court, a lecturer in tax law at Brasileiro Institute of Education, Development and Research, and a PhD candidate in tax and public finance in a law school of the Rio de Janeiro State University. So thank you very much for the presentation. And you clearly indicated, on the one hand, the justice system, what is being done, the law itself, the act that you mentioned, and what is the reality on the ground when you have the decisions of the court. So what are the hiccups, the obstacles now that you face? So I think you clearly indicated what can be done, but what are the minuses, what still needs to be done to effectively tackle tax abuse, etc. And what is very important, you mentioned that, yes, sharing of information, but that is between and among institutions. But what you do not have is that the information becomes public. That is something missing, right? So you do not yet have the information, tax information, or the information that is shared between the institution. It is not yet public to the overall, the general citizen, if I may say so. So that is something that is lacking. And another very important issue that I picked up is, so yes, you have the court case, but then people start to pay some taxes, and that is then to avoid the further legal action against them. So that is something else that you brought to the table. So thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Penchak, please?
Not at the moment, Ms. Soeknandan. I think we can go on into Mrs. Glaucia Lauleta Frashino's comments. And Glaucia is a partner at Matos Filho Law Firm and has over 25 years experience in tax litigation. She's a counsel at the São Paulo section of the Brazilian Bar, a member of the International Bar Organization, member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Tax Committee, and a member of the Women Corporate Directors Foundation. So Glaucia, on to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Good morning for everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I thank for the invitation from Ana Cláudia, Ana Carolina Monguiló, Flávia, and Daniele Brigagão. It's a wonderful opportunity to be among you, okay? Well, about Nina and her presentation, congrats, Nina. I think that your presentation was very complete. I like the idea to bring precedents from our Supreme Court. And I remember that you said that not necessarily the decisions, they reflect your opinion. So I think that I brought some questions because I really believe that it's important to have your opinion. You are the specialist. So with my questions, I will try to have your opinion to improve, to add value to our discussion here. Wow, I will start with a question about your first topic, transparency. You mentioned that Supreme Federal Court's precedent, which understood that unconstitutionality of a complementary law provisions that allows banks to send taxpayers' data to the federal revenue without the need for judicial authorization. It's a very polemic decision from the Supreme Court. However, considering some of Brazil's cultural aspects, like the fact that we have probably the largest number of tax litigation cases in the world, and a strong conflict between taxpayers and tax authorities, the lack of confidence between taxpayers and tax authorities, in your opinion, can't this decision encourage abuse by tax authorities? In other words, is it possible that the impartiality in taxpayers and tax authorities relations would not be guaranteed precisely with the judiciary's participations through a judicial decision which Supreme Court understood that is dispensable? What is your opinion about this?
Oh, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Glaucia, but I agree with with this decision of the Supreme Court. As I said, the tax administrative authorities have the duty to keep the secrecy of the data and the bank information. Otherwise, they can face criminal and civil procedures. And it was a concern for some justice during this trial. The possibility of the data doesn't remain secret. So I understand the worries of the taxpayers, but I think this is a trend, an international trend. Many countries have been doing this for a long time. I can mention United States that since the 70s, they have an act that makes bank and financial institutions to share information with public authorities, public tax authorities. Also, there are similar acts in France, Portugal, Germany, and if I can compare the decision of the Brazilian Supreme Court to other courts worldwide, we can see that in Italy and in Spain, their Supreme Courts, they decided like Brazilian decided. So I think that one thing that we can hold on to is the secrecy of information and the responsibility of the public agent with this information. And I don't think that there is another way, because of all the multilateral agreements that Brazil signed, because of Action 5 of BEPS projects that Brazil is working together with OECD, and now the FACTI Panel report also reassure that transparency is a priority, not only international level, but also in national level. So I'm sorry to disappoint you with this.
No, you didn't disappoint me. In fact, I would try to improve the discussion about this. I totally understand your argument. I think that it's a good point of view. But of course, that the concern about the taxpayers in Brazil, it's a reality. You know that we sometimes we face a kind of abuse. But I totally understand your argument in this topic, and I understand it's a very good point of view. Thank you, Nina. Well, about the second topic that you mentioned the decisions about the mensalão and car wash. We know that in recent years, we have seen emblematic political judgments in Brazil before the Federal Supreme Court that called the attention of the society. The Brazilian Supreme Court gave some interpretations about criminal legislation, we know this. And in some situations, the court's tendency was not favorable for those who were accused of committing these crimes. I can see that in some situations, the justices were very conservative. The example that you gave, no need to prove the origin of money for the characterization of illegal transfer of funds, in my opinion, shows this trend. The question is, do you think that when the Supreme Court comes across other topics, different topics like human rights, environment issues, etc., could these interpretations have consequence for the Brazil's sustainable development?
Oh, thank you for the question, Glaucia. I know that when it comes to interpretation of criminal laws, I don't think that all justice decide in the same direction.
Yes.
We saw recently the court ruled that only after the last appeals decision, a defendant will face prison. So the court changed its own precedent that it is also recent. This change benefited all the defendants and made the innocence of presumption prevail in our system, in our precedent system. So it's not like black or white. We have many things in the middle. On the other hand, when it comes to fundamental rights of minorities such as women, indigenous people, the black people community, LGBTQIA plus community, the court plays its main role. The interpretation of the Constitution and the laws in order to protect those minorities, acting as a counter-majoritarian branch and promoting fundamental rights. And I can mention many decisions in this way, like the 2011 decision that allowed LGBT people to marry, the 2011 decision that allowed abortion in case of an encephalic fetus, also the 2005 validation of quota system in public universities. So in these manners, I don't think we have a problem with the case laws decisions of the Supreme Court. Also, I can say the same when it comes to the environmental preservation projects that we have in bills that we have in Brazil and the ones that are challenged before the Supreme Court. I think that when it comes to human rights and minority rights and environmental law, the Supreme Court is very protective and progressive and not conservative.
Well, I really hope that you are right, Nina. Let's see the future happenings. Well, going to your third topic, fiscal justice. You said that the Supreme Court decided that money originated in illicit activities must be taxed. It's a very polemic decision. And my question is, this conclusion seems far at first, but how to reconcile the sense of justice with some of the legal concepts in force our country, like tax can be a punishment for illegal acts? It makes sense, in your opinion, this flexibility with the concepts in the country?
Yeah, I think it makes sense because I don't think that taxation here works as a sanction. I think it's the taxation of illicit activities, it works just as the same as the taxation of licit activities. And also our tax code, Brazilian tax code, in my opinion, established the possibility of this taxation regardless the validity of the activity itself. And I think it's, as you said, it's a matter of justice because capital gain or income derived from illicit activities, they are taxed. And I think it would be unfair if the opposite didn't happen. So, and also we have a pragmatic issue here that this case law, it permits that the money that was taken from the society comes back in a way. In this way is the taxation. It's important here to say that there are no higher rates in this taxation of illicit capitals. The rates are the same as of the licit incomes and capitals, but the penalties are higher. So I don't think there is a problem here.
Okay, thank you very much, Nina. And for finish our discussion here, I have the last question. I know that is a little polemic, but I really would like to hear you about this. Although we are talking about entirely different topics, do you think that Brazil's position about the pandemic, which goes against the international guidelines, especially the World Health Organization's guidelines, may affect the country's credibility concerning its efforts to collaborate with legal measures that increase transparency, information sharing, tax evasion, fiscal justice, and etc. How, in your opinion, our position about the current most important issue, world issue, can affect our position as country regarding another topics and other issues and other teams? I would like to hear your opinion about this.
Well, it's unfortunate I can't talk deep about this subject, but I can answer that all I can see is a huge effort of the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, when it's provoked in these issues regarding to COVID-19, to mitigate the negative impacts of the misconducts and leadership failures regarding to the crisis. So I think the institutions the judiciary institution try to do the best.
Yes, I agree. I think that we need to believe in judiciary and all the decisions that we are facing right now. Well, I think that I can finish my participation. One more time, I would like to appreciate and thank the opportunity to be here. Congrats, Nina, your presentation, your topics, your answers were very, very important to the discussions. And I'm very happy because it's promising here that the recommendations of the report, if implemented, will empower women around the world. I really believe it good news and very important to address this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nina, for your presentation. Thank you very much for everybody here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Loleta, for the questions. Very important. Ms. Nina Penchak, quickly, two issues. There is a question, is information sharing between public authorities a threat to data protection under the new Brazilian law? That is a question I see in the chat. I think it's a very important question. And just for my own concept, so in Brazil, you tax illicit activities and you tax legal activities. Am I correct?
The profit, the capital, only the illicit activities and the capital that derived from the illicit activity.
The capital.
Yeah.
Okay. So
for instance, we don't tax drug dealing, for example, on sales tax, but we can tax the capital derived from the drug dealing.
Oh, the capital from the drug dealing. Okay.
In the interest
the other answer,
yes, please, on the question that was asked about public authorities.
The LGPD law is a law that is a special law to implement data protection in Brazil, and I think it can be and will be implemented to secure this data that is shared with public agents. I don't see a problem with this. There are now some other procedures in way, but I don't see why LGPD law cannot be used for this purpose.
Okay, thank you very, very much for the presentation and answering the questions. So Ms. Tatiana, we then go to Ms. Zaida Manata, who is the head of the Secretariat of the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes. And she took up the duty in October 2019. She's also a member of the Brazilian Revenue Administration, acting on the various roles, including Deputy Commissioner General and Coordinator of Brazil's participation in the BEPS project. She is a Brazilian national and a graduate from Universidade Federal de Bahia in Brazil and of Université Sorbonne Nouvelle in France. So please, you have the floor. Gaps in tax cooperation and transparency, how to make exchange of information truly bilateral for developing countries exploring structural difficulties. So please, Ms. Manata, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning, maybe good afternoon all. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to speak to a Brazilian audience. It's not always that I have this opportunity, so it's a really, really great pleasure to be here and to listen to the discussions and the concerns from different perspectives. First, if you allow me, let me explain a bit what is the Global Forum about. The Global Forum has 162 members. Amongst them, we have 88 developing countries. And these developing countries, they participate on an equal footing. They have a voice and a vote. They also are members of the key bodies within the Global Forum, meaning they are members of the steering group. Now we have, for example, South Africa as a vice chair of the Global Forum. They are also important members of the peer review groups. The Global Forum is responsible for implementing the two standards, the standard of exchange of information on request and the exchange of automatic exchange of financial account information. And in these two bodies, we have also developing countries participating on an equal footing. And all the decisions are taken by consensus, meaning that one country can say no to the decisions, except when it comes to reports. In the case of peer reviews, it's consensus -1. So that's the only case where we don't have a consensus-based rule. I must say that this is the same for the inclusive framework and for the BEPS project, it was the same. So all the countries participating had a voice and a vote. I would like to also highlight that the country-by-country report, as well as any information that is exchanged through the common transmitter system, they do not go to the OECD. The information goes straight from one tax administration to the other one. The OECD has just put in place the common transmittal system, but it does not access the information. Taxpayer information is protected and it's only shared between tax administrations. So just to clarify a couple of aspects that were discussed here before. I think it's important to highlight the approach taken by the FACTI report when it highlights the need for a whole of government approach for fighting illicit financial flows. It's very important to take this approach because what we have seen sometimes is the approach have been in silos and they don't talk to each other. However, these issues, this very relevant and difficult, challenging issue of illicit financial flows can only be tackled through international cooperation and a whole of government approach. So I welcome this approach and I congratulate the panel members for taking this comprehensive approach. I must say that the report does not fully present the progress that was achieved in the last decade due to the work carried out in several forums, such as FATF, the Global Forum, the OECD, and others. I think the environment today is quite different from what we had 10 years or 15 years ago. It doesn't mean that we have reached an optimal level and nothing must be done. I think there is still a lot to be done and to move the transparency and the fairness of tax systems forward. There is still a lot to be done, but I think we must recognize that we have made huge progress. I will focus a bit more on the Global Forum things, and if you consider that 10 years ago, it was quite usual to not have access to banking information, which is not a reality now. Now, almost all jurisdictions have removed barriers to banking, to access to banking information. Also, accounting records. It was not a global standard that all tax administration had access to accounting information and they could share these accounting records for tax purpose. And also the legal and beneficial ownership information. This is still a challenging area, but a lot was done. And you can see that even the discussion that we have just followed 1 minute ago about access from tax administration to the banking information, and now we have automatic exchange of banking information between tax administration. It's a standard. It's a global standard, and more and more countries are benefiting from that. We have now around 100 jurisdictions exchanging information on an automatic basis on their taxpayers. But all this progress could only be achieved because we governments have put in place a whole government approach, and they have involved key stakeholders, meaning all the relevant bodies, offices, civil society, professionals, companies, financial institutions, etc. It's impossible to promote reforms at this level if you don't bring everybody together, if you don't get the buy-in, not only from politicians, but also from the whole society. And so this is a project of one country. It's not a project of one group. It must be the project of a whole of the whole society. And the benefit that we have seen for countries and for the people are tremendous, not only in terms of revenue collection. We have now jurisdiction reporting having identified more than 107 billion of euros just through offshore investigations and voluntary disclosure program. But also in terms of fairness, in terms of trust in the tax system, in the government, in the authorities, and also in the sustainability of the tax systems. So I see the progress as something really, really remarkable at this point. I see a lot of challenges, and challenges to ensure that all jurisdictions benefit from these standards and from what transparency can bring. And I will just enumerate a couple of them. The lack of capacity. We see that especially developing jurisdictions, they need a lot of support to build their capacity and to put in place a framework that enables them to participate and get the most benefits they can from these standards. We have an issue of research, and here I'm talking about all kinds of research: human research, financial research, IT systems, etc. Another challenge is to get the political buy-in. It's impossible to move the transparency agenda if you don't have the political buy-in, and to get it, it's needed to raise awareness and to understand the benefits that can come from it. There is also still this culture of working in silos within the jurisdictions, among jurisdictions, and if I may even expand it a bit, among the global community. Going more in details, bioinformation is still a challenge for many jurisdictions. Just to give you an idea, from the Global Forum peer reviews on exchange of information on request, we have found that around 1/3 of jurisdictions still face challenges in implementing this requirement. So there is an area where we see that much more efforts should be made, and support, especially for developing jurisdiction, is needed. Another area is automatic exchange of information, and here I'm talking about financial account information. This standard has been perceived as a very powerful tool to fight tax evasion and aggressive tax planning, and also illicit financial flows. In 2019, the participating jurisdictions exchanged information of more than 84 million of financial account information, in a total that reached more than 10 trillion of euros. So this is really the magnitude of these exchanges is impressive, and this brings much more sustainability to the tax systems, where a taxpayer that does not engage in cross-border transaction is not tax different from the one that can afford engaging in a cross-border transaction. So it's about the fairness of the tax system. But we still face a challenge to ensure that all developing jurisdictions can engage in these exchanges and can fully benefit from it. And when I say fully benefit, I mean that they can really use this information for risk assessments and to cross-check with the information they have internally. The poor infrastructure in many jurisdictions is one of the key obstacles for them to engage in this exchange, in this tool, they fully use the tool of automatic exchange of information. However, I don't believe that having a different standard for developing countries or developing jurisdictions would be the best approach. I believe that to be on an equal footing and to have a say on each other reviews, it's important that the jurisdictions are all submitted to the same standard, so they know they they are making comments when one jurisdiction is being reviewed, but this jurisdiction would also make comments when the first jurisdiction is reviewed, and also that they know the challenges and how the challenges can be overcome. So it's very important to be submitted to the same standards, so you have a say on the peer reviews and on the discussions and on the decisions. I also believe that the standards of transparency and exchange of information have an impact not only in the transactions and in the relationship between peers, between jurisdictions, but also they have a domestic impact. The fact we have seen in many jurisdictions that implementing this standard have helped them have access to the information for their own use, for their own domestic purpose, because now it's required that the information is there and it's available to them. So this has helped many jurisdictions, and that's what we heard from our members, that the peer review process is a very helpful process for them. And another aspect that I would like to raise is that if we were to develop a different standard for automatic exchange of information, for example, that would mean making a different standard for the confidentiality requirements. Would that mean that taxpayers from a developing country should be treated in a less considerate way than taxpayers from a developed jurisdiction? So I think it's very important that we take we help all jurisdictions to come to a common ground, and that they are in a position to implement the standards so they can fully benefit from that. I would like to share with you some amazing news that will come out probably in the next month. We have an initiative, the Africa Initiative. It's an initiative from the Global Forum together with its partners, and the UN is also a partner in this initiative, together with the African Union Commissioner, ATAF, CREDAF, World Bank, IMF, etc. And in this initiative that aims at helping unlock the tax transparency in Africa, we saw that last year in 2020, for the first time, Africa became a net sender of exchange of information requests. So far, Africa was more providing information, but they changed it. And in last year, they became a net sender. It means that they are benefiting more and more from this tool, which is a reason to celebrate, at least for us. Another aspect I think it's important to highlight is that many developing countries are claiming for the use of tax exchanged information for non-tax purpose. Does it mean that tax information should not be kept confidential, or that taxpayer secrecy doesn't work? No, not at all. It's just that this call for a whole of government approach so that this information can be used, taking all the precautions and keeping the secrets of the information for non-tax purpose to fight other illicit financial flows such as corruption, money laundering, etc. And for this purpose, we have an initiative with Latin American countries, the Punta del Este Declaration Initiative, that aims at exploring this, how this can be done, how this can be further developed so that jurisdictions from the Latin American region can benefit from it. Brazil is a signatory of this declaration. And for this declaration, we have now the chair, which is Argentina, and the vice chair is Costa Rica. Oh, I should have said that. So the Africa Initiative also has a chair, which is the Kenya Commission General, and the vice chair, who is the South African Commission General as well. So if I just to finalize, I think I'm running a bit late. The way forward, the way we can ensure that all countries can benefit from the transparency and exchange of information standards and from all this discussion is raising awareness, building capacity, and supporting jurisdiction in their journey. I believe that the progress achieved should be celebrated, no matter which institution is promoting it, or is driving it, or is helping the jurisdictions. But they should be celebrated the progress, and it should be the basis for further advancement. I believe that cooperation and working together is extremely important. And we do not need to duplicate or to rebuild the work that was done. For example, the Global Forum used FATF definition of beneficial ownership, and we contribute to the work of FATF and the regional bodies, providing inputs, explaining the impact of this definition on our work and how we see the future. So I think collaboration and working together is the way forward. I also believe that developing jurisdictions need support, and they need all the assistance that they can get. And divisions, fights will not help members advance the tax transparency agenda. I believe in building bridges and advancing transparency in the global scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Manata. And I liked your presentation very much. Just to say that the UN FACTI Panel, we do recognize, we do recognize the development so far. And what we are promoting is actually to accelerate processes and procedures to tackle tax evasion and improve accountability, transparency, and so on. And you already mentioned the all-inclusive approach, which is the same what is in our document. The lack of capacity, building capacity, political buy-in, that's also mentioned in our report. But the political buy-in goes beyond raising awareness. It also means active participation and active input in what is being developed. Otherwise, you will not have the political buy-in. The working in silos, that's in all countries. It's in developing and developed countries. It's something that is also mentioned in the report. And of course, it reflects then how countries work with each other, because it's very difficult. And the automatic exchange of information, also mentioned, the peer review, those things have also been mentioned. And the common policy should be an all-inclusive approach. So we're fully for that. So actually, we are not speaking a different language. And again, we do recognize the work that has been done so far, but for the political buy-in, it is very crucial that we go beyond raising awareness alone. We need to have the active participation and input. We need to have the voting rights and those things. And as I mentioned when I started with the presentation, there is absolutely, we do not have financial resources nor human resources to go for any duplication or triplication of any efforts, right? So I think I should make that clear, and that is also mentioned in the report. I am now going to Ms. Raquel Noves. No, is that okay? Noves, excuse me.
Novaes.
Novaes, who is a partner at Machado Meyer Law Firm and a director of ABDF. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Manorma. I would like to congratulate ABDF in conjunction with FACTI Panel for the organization of this webinar. And I am grateful for being invited, which gave me an opportunity to be aware of this initiative at FACTI level, which is an important initiative. It's very opportune, and it should, giving awareness to this initiative is very relevant, especially for Brazil. Our session here deals with exchange of information, and the transparency. Transparency is a result, shall be a result of cooperation, and cooperation relies on coordination. I will make some comments addressed to the set of recommendations 2, 4, and 14 of the panel, first in the first set of questions. And then I have some comments and a question regarding the set of recommendations 8 and 11. Recommendation 2 of FACTI Panel proposed the creation of an open and inclusive instrument, meaning a UN tax convention with the universal participation of, of all countries, jurisdictions, to deal with the imbalance of the coexistence of various forums that gives room for lack of transparency. It also in addressing, in commenting value for fairness, the FACTI Panel also addresses and exposes the complexity of certain cross-border requirements and regulations extensively dealt by OECD conventions and guidelines, as transfer pricing, as pillar inclusive framework dealing with pillar 1 and 2, and show the imbalance between developing and developed countries vis-a-vis their ability to comply with so many complex and, in other words, intensive working requirements. Then it also proposes the creation of just one convention to deal with everything. And it proposed also a revitalized body to govern all the initiatives in dealing with the lack of transparency. So I read carefully the presentation by Zaida, and congratulate you, Zaida, for the excellent presentation, which gives us opportunity to get to know many of the initiatives at the level of OECD, but especially at the level of the Global Forum. And I ask both of you, Zaida and Manorma, which institution should be this? I see the FACTI Panel proposing a new revitalized institution, and I see Zaida representing the Global Forum saying that the Global Forum has already worked a lot in dealing with many of these aspects of transparency and have achieved a lot. So probably there should be a conversion between the two organizations, UN and OECD, instead of UN creating a new revitalized body, or OECD converging to UN. This is something that I really have a question on, because there are already important initiatives with a good level of development. But I also agree that OECD, being a club for the developed countries, make no easy the life of the undeveloped countries or developing countries to get into the club. But I also know and understand that the requirements to join OECD are different from the requirements to join Global Forum, and there are things being held and taken care by the different forums at OECD. So my question is for you both, which entity should converge to the other to make this coordination possible? Because I do believe that a coordination in terms of exchange of information, transparency, fairness, need to be put in place. And I just want to have an answer on both of you representing FACTI, UN, and OECD Global Forum, which should be the best way to go. Create a new or converge both, or UN converge to the Global Forum already existing? This is my first question. Then I will go for a second question, which is the convention. OECD has already a convention, and UN, both entities have been working in conventions. Brazil uses more UN convention than OECD convention for many of the treaties, but both have done a lot in terms of defining convention, or a good way for countries to relate to each other in terms of achieving a better cooperation and a better definition of which is the taxing entity in a cross-border relationship. So, of course, ideally, one only convention would make global options easier. But do you really believe that it's possible to have just one convention, either OECD giving up its own principles already established, or UN giving up and creating a new whole new convention for all countries to go for? I have doubts on the. I congratulate the aim and the good will in proposing that, but I have my doubts on the efficacy of this aim. And finally, I have questions, comments on the matter of exchange of information. The FACT panel, I couldn't get from the FACT panel any reference to the protection of the taxpayer rights. Of course, taxpayers are target now of wise eyes in terms of their operations, their ability to pay taxes, and the BEPS, all the BEPS initiatives, and all the, of course, they need to pay a fair portion of tax, and they need to adhere to transparent methods. But of course, the discussions, the global discussions on exchange of information, all have reached one conclusion. There are rights that need to be protected. The rights of protecting industrial, commercial, and authorship secrets. These are base for economic progress of the private agents. They base their economic development on the protection of those secrets. This is one of probably the only element that is protected in most tax conventions Brazil has entered with, which gives reason for Brazil to refuse information which is not protect taxpayer rights in connection to secrecy of industrial and commercial operations. We are in an area of transparency, but we are also in an area of hackers and exposure. So the accountability should come in the other way around. My comment in this regard is that the enhancement in the mechanisms of transparency and full exchange of information, as well as the centralization of all taxpayers' data, as recommended in set of recommendations 8 and 11, should also follow the ability of, first, make distinctions on taxpayers in real suspicious transactions, provide data protection to the taxpayers, turning states accountable for any hacking attacks, any misuse of information, and finally, to make taxpayers in a certain way give ability to the taxpayers to have minimum intervenience in the exchange of information, at least on request. These are my comments and questions. They are for both, for Zaida and Manorma. You please respond to them as you feel comfortable to, in respect to your own roles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And those questions are very pertinent and very important. And I want to thank you for raising those issues, because the questions you raised also were raised when we had sessions with the several stakeholders, the member states, and so on. Again, let me emphasize again, and it's in the report, there is absolutely no intention or no recommendation that we have to duplicate or triplicate. Okay? What is already there has to be strengthened, has to be improved. Now, if we can cooperate, if we can coordinate, that's good. But one should remember that it is the United Nations that is the only multilateral, universal, or global organization. And all member states have signed on and have adhered to all the conventions and etc. coming from the UN. Now, you mentioned about transparency. Mention has been made about developed countries and developing countries. I am coming from a small developing countries, and I'll give you an example. And I hope this doesn't take longer than it should be. The Caribbean countries, where most of them, 99% islands, small economies, small-based economies, okay? And what do we experience right now for quite a while? Yes, you have the OECD, and then you have the FATF. You adhere to the rules of the one, that's FATF, because you've signed on. And we just heard that OECD is also working with them, but you're being blacklisted, gray listed, or whatever color listed, right? So there is a controversial thing going on, and who is being put in a disadvantaged position? It's the respective country. So it will really take a lot to streamline standards, rules, and so on. Capacity constraints, you have a population of 70,000. And you have 1 or 2 lawyers within your ministry dealing with all the laws in your country. Now, what do you do? What do you give priority? These are some practical issues. These are some practical challenges that small developing countries have to face. And that's why, and I'm glad that Ms. Manata mentioned capacity building, but capacity building in a sustainable way. When we had a session, Barbados was in that session, and the gentleman mentioned for one legislation, it took them 2 years because the same people are dealing with 15, 20 legislations per year. Okay, so so it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. It cannot be. People have to be sensitive to the specific needs and the challenges that especially small developing countries have. And that's why we are proposing the UN, because at least there, all the member states will have an equal right to voice their concerns, to vote, etc., etc. And we're not saying that OECD has to be given up or you close it down or whatever. No, let us work together. A lot has already been done. The experience is there. We should not lose the experience. We can work together, but it should be under the umbrella of the UN. That multilateralism, that is what the panel is proposing. Okay, so we're not saying tie the ribbon and close OECD. No, there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of human resource development, capacity. Those things are already there. Why you want to lose it? No, let us have an all-inclusive approach. And I think several members and presenters mentioned it, the all-inclusive approach, the capacity building. Those things should not be lost, but it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, okay? Because the burden is too much on the small economies. So it cannot be. So again, no duplication, no triplication. We have to work together. We have to coordinate. We have to support each other. We have to assist. But we don't only hear people, but we have to listen to people. And then you will get the political buy-in. Okay. Now the protection of taxpayers. You have issues like intellectual property rights, industrial rights, and so on. It's a lot. And of course, when you develop these things, all of these things, you have to take these things into account, right? The issue about hackers, about exposure, about accountability, the data protection, misuse of information, very important. These things have to be part of the legislation. And I know that currently a lot is being developed. I know, for example, when you want to get funding, etc., you need to have some type of legislation in place so that the data that you share, it's not being misused, people's privacy information and so on. You know, you need to have permission, and it's a lot of detail, which we cannot put in the report, right? But those things will go in the respective legislation or the respective conventions and those types of things. So I hope I've given a synopsis of what went on in the panel and what type of conversation we had and what is the thinking behind our proposals. Absolutely not to tie OECD and so on. Absolutely not. We haven't said that. Cooperation, coordination, but under the UN umbrella. Thank you very much. Ms. Manata, I would like to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will try to be brief because I see that we are a bit late on the time. So let me, first, let me start by saying that no tax convention disregard the taxpayers' rights, but when the tax conventions they deal with exchange of information, they recognize that the taxpayers' rights in terms of tax secrecy, and they the situations in which an administration can deny providing the information, they are there, but it's up to each jurisdiction to establish the laws and the regulation that would govern these protections. Of course, confidentiality when we come to automatic exchange information is key, and this is why we have a very robust process to review the confidentiality of jurisdictions before they engage in automatic exchange of information and after. So it's a very robust process to give comfort to jurisdictions that the information is not going to be leaked and they are properly, all the data are properly protected. Some jurisdictions, especially in Europe, they are much more concerned about data protection. And this means, especially, for example, taxpayer having the right to correct the information and to check and to erase if it's wrong and replace, etc. So if this discussion is not well advanced in some jurisdictions, it does not mean that the convention just disregard them. They just led to each jurisdiction to establish the laws and the regulation that are appropriate for them. And this is because, as said, no one size fits all. And you need to take into account the culture, the legal environment, the institutional framework, etc. One other aspect that I think it's important to highlight here is that all the exchange of information are based on just one single article that is further unfolded, but it's just the Article 26 of both the UN and the OECD model. So it's one single article, and this is we have full convergence here from both the UN and the OECD side. That the two models, they both relate to the Article 26, and then whatever comes, it's after. So it's the fundamentals are the same and they are there. So I don't see any divergence here at all. I see that this is exactly where we are, and it seems to be broad agreement that this is the way forward. I must say that I have never heard from developing countries a complaint against the transparency and exchange of information. I've heard this sometimes from some investment hubs, but not from developing countries. And now I must say that in terms of exchange of information, tax avoidance, the fight against illicit financial flows, etc., it's a bit complicated because one is small jurisdiction. If it does not follow the international standards, if it does not agree with the rules that are applied to everybody, it can have a huge impact on the financial flows throughout the globe. So the size of the jurisdiction might not be necessarily an assurance that its impact is going to be limited. You can see that when you see the investments, publication, the statistics, and you see that a small jurisdiction might have a huge impact on financial flows. So for me, I would think that it's important that we have a global agreement and that everybody are reviewed or are expected to apply the same rules. I think that now developing countries, they need so much support to fully benefit from this that it seems to me important to avoid duplication and to just have all the hands on the deck and that we all work together to push it forward because tax avoidance has hit developing jurisdictions more than any other. So they are the ones that are suffering the most from this. When you see the statistics for Africa, you see that they are the ones that really need a huge support. So I would say that all institutions, all international organizations should just brace and help them together to to make this agenda progressive and advancing the most possible. I'm afraid that if we have several different standards, this might create confusion and increase disputes. So I would think that it's important that we all work in the same direction and moving together to advance the tax transparency agenda. The scenario that you said before, like what if we had developing countries and developed countries working separately and trying to advance their own agenda, I think that would be a nightmare. I think what we need is to get everybody together to agree and to move forward, because you know, it's important that all the countries can commit with something and can move with this agenda together. I see that there is a lot of need to help developing countries, not all of them, but many of them, to fully understand the scope of the discussions, the consequence, and to be able to formulate their own ideas and to negotiate them, to speak their minds and to move this agenda. Because you know, it's important that when they are at the table, they can have an impactful participation, and this can only be done through building their own capacity to speak their minds and to promote their own interests. I don't see any contradiction with promoting transparency and taxpayer protection at all. I think these two values should work together and be all well balanced. And if there is an inappropriate use, that should be taken into account by the appropriate forum. So I don't see this contradiction at all. But I do hope that in a couple of years we can celebrate even more the transparency and the advance and the benefit, and that we can celebrate more and more achievements.
No, I don't see any incoherence between exchange of, no, that's I do believe with you. So what if FACTI Panel have a conjunction with Global Forum, and then you have this new revitalized organization, so that this is the first step for a effective coordination on everything. That's with these words, I finish my intervention here.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Just to say, the FACTI Panel gave recommendations, and it is up to the member states to accept and to implement. Okay, and the FACTI Panel has absolutely no controversial things and so on with anyone. So let me be very clear about it. Okay, so we always say we have to cooperate, we have to coordinate, we have to join, and we should not lose the resources that we have already put in place to deal with issues. I think that is very, very crucial, okay, because the resources are scarce and you don't just throw in your resources, what you already have garnered. It is just how do you improve, how do you accelerate the processes to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. And with that, Ms. Tanya, back to you. I don't know if there is any other question, or I would like to give you the closing remarks. I really want to thank everyone for the presentations and for the questions. Very good questions, very important. And I think our audience, they have been made aware a lot, not only of the panel, the report, but also about the questions and the answers that have been given. So, Ms. Tanya, I'm going back to you, please.
Absolutely, and thank you to all our speakers today and debaters. I think it was such an interesting debate that we're actually running about an hour late. It took much longer than originally expected, and it shows the quality of the debates that we've been having today. I know I've learned a lot through this process. Ana Cláudia had to leave a little early, but she asked me to thank both the FACTI panel and the speakers on behalf of ABDF. And so I communicate her message to you now. And just to let know to our attendees and also to our speakers that this event will be available, freely available for consultation by all at the ABDF's YouTube channel. So we hope to have a lot more accesses and harness attention to this very important report. And with that, Ms. Soeknandan, if you would like to give the final words, we don't have any more questions, so I believe we can close the session. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank each and everyone for their presentation, for their input, and it's very much appreciated. And again, I applaud the fact that the initiative came from the Brazil Women's Group. I mean, and it's all about empowerment. You can also find that back in the report. And yeah, just to say thank you all. Thank you for the organizers for choosing the right people, I think, to come up with the presentations, because that is also very important. I see Ms. Manata wants the floor. Ms. Manata, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, I just wanted to say that because of the last intervention about the Global Forum and how to merge it, and I just would like to say that the UN is already an observer at the Global Forum, and so we have. I think we have an established body that has been working on these topics, and that we would welcome more and more participation from the UN and at the Global Forum discussions. Just to highlight that we are welcoming that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Manata. And with that, Ms. Tatiana, on my behalf again, thank you all very much for the presentations and for your input. It's very much appreciated. And I wish you all a good afternoon, a healthy lunch. Please stay safe, very important. We have to stay safe so that we can continue our work and be with our families. So, and have a healthy lunch too. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great day.